Welcome into the college football preview show. We got Ralph Michaels from WagerTalk.com, Rob Veno, SportsMemo.com. You see their Twitter handles right there. And guys, we're breaking down the Big 12 Conference, the last 5 teams in ABC order on today's show, starting with Oklahoma State. But first up, Ralph Michaels, how you feeling today, buddy?
Hey, doing great. I always love these Tuesdays. I get so excited about college football. You can talk NFL all you want, but there's an extra spark when it's college football.
Oh, Ralph, I'm with you, man. This is my favorite sport, and I believe it's Robbie Veno's as well. Good Tuesday morning to you, Robbie.
Yeah, again, afternoon on my side of the country here, but I'm with you guys. And you know, it makes it better when you talk with a couple of guys that are college football enthusiasts as well. So between the three of us, I think we all get a little excited to do this show each and every week to dig into it. And, you know, like we were talking off air, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that there's a season here. If there is, we'll certainly be well prepared for it.
We will. I mean, it's therapeutical to go through all the changes here with you guys. I've really enjoyed it each and every Tuesday, guys. 1 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific, Tuesdays right here on the WagerTalk YouTube channel. And first up, guys, it's in Ralph, we were just talking about possibly the number 2 and number 3 best teams in the conference right off the bat here for today's show. We got Oklahoma State 8-4 last year. ATS wise, I'm showing them at 8-4 as well. I guess you could have had them 8-3, 9-3, and 5-7. A small trender towards the under. You wouldn't normally think that with a Gundy-led offense. And talking about coronavirus here, 14 positive tests in the past month for Oklahoma State is what I read right before the show here. Obviously, some fanfare, Ralph, in terms of a shirt Mike Gundy wore. You know, if you've been on Twitter or anything, you've probably seen it, but I guess that's not really good for the locker room, good for recruiting. But heck, one of their best players anyway, Chuba Hubbard, I believe, isn't really happy with the head coach. I haven't really been following so much of the fanfare off the field, Ralph. I don't know if you think that will matter much, and also your overall thoughts of Oklahoma State this upcoming year, man.
You know, more often than not, Drew, the way it happened this early in the sensitive times, you know, with the Black Lives Matter, I think it's going to be a bonding agent. I think, you know, Gundy came and said, hey, I made a mistake, and what can we do to move forward? And, you know, let's just gel. So to me, more often than not, I mean, you're not talking about a non-established coach who doesn't have his presence there, who isn't loved by his players. So to me, it's, you know, it's a situation where I think they actually become a stronger team because of it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And Robbie, what about you, man? And what are you thinking here overall for the Cowboys in 2020?
Yeah, you know, I happen to have a good buddy of mine who's an Oklahoma State alum, and you know, so I think exactly what Ralph said will be the case here. I think when this stuff happens early, and you have time to talk it out and hug it out the way Hubbard and Coach Gundy did, I think that's a positive. If this had happened in the middle of the season or something like that, it could have been a real distraction at that point in time. Reporters all over the place. Not that they won't be for opening day because, you know, reporters love these types of stories. But it led to other things. There was another report that came out that showed just how distant Mike Gundy had become from the program without even realizing it. In a time, guys, where almost every head coach we read about is in constant contact with his players every single day during this coronavirus shutdown period, Mike Gundy, you know, hung up the phone, went to Montana, worked on his own home up there, and pretty much cut off relations with the players and had a assistant coach handle that. That was brought up by players. I think it's a minor thing. When they all sat down in the room and listed all these things, such as Mike Gundy not knowing players' names, only calling them by number. You know, there's plenty of coaches that call players by number. A lot of times it's the opponent, but a lot of times, you know, oh, it's great to have number 5 on our side. You know, it's common coach speak. So all these little things that were dredged up, I think were talked out amongst OSU players. I don't think it's going to be a problem. And if it were, guys, it would be a shame because this is a team, as we talked about in a prior show, that's locked and loaded to be competitive with OU this year. Real quick on the coaching side, Casey Dunn, wide receivers coach, promoted to offensive coordinator. Mike Gundy goes through offensive coordinators. He finds them other people take them. Casey Dunn's just going to run the offense as is, so Oklahoma State should be good. The fact that they got Hubbard and Tylan Wallace to come back for this season is a great coup for Oklahoma State. It's a team with 18 starters back. Defensively, they should be better. Offensively, they're going to be dynamite. You give Spencer Sanders another year in this offense. I don't have anything really negative to say about Oklahoma State except for can they overcome, what's become a constant loss to Oklahoma every single year in recent memory. I think that this team is built to have success. Obviously, inside the conference, you play all 9 teams for Oklahoma State. I think they get in fact, they do. They get the short side of the stick this year with 4 home and 5 away. Not so sure that when you're this talented, it matters all that much, except for the fact that you're playing Oklahoma on the road. Non-conference isn't terribly tough. Oregon State, Tulsa, and Western Illinois. So I don't know what the over-under is for season wins, Drew, but Oklahoma State could be headed towards the over direction.
Did we lost Drew there? So I'll just go ahead and continue on with you, Rob. And,
okay.
I had put out a tweet today, and if you want to know the definition of loaded in college football, it's the Cowboys. So, you had mentioned 18 returning starters. One of the biggest starters that they also get back is Calvin Bundage, a 20-game starter the previous 2 years at linebacker. He was injured, missed the entire last year. And then you add in 2 transfers, a DB from Missouri, which has 12 starts in 2 years, and probably one of the biggest transfers there are, Mims from West Virginia, who was a second-team All-Big 12 2 years ago, only started 2 games and was injured. So realistically, you have 21 returning starters on this team. Last week we talked about the other half of the Big Ten. I'm not sure where your rankings are, Rob, but I have them Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Baylor, Kansas State, Texas Tech, West Virginia, and Kansas. And then the one more thing I do want to bring up that you and I talk about often, the spring practices. TCU had 4, Texas Tech had 4, Oklahoma State had 3, and the only other team in the Big 12 that had any was Oklahoma with 1. So we both agree Oklahoma State clearly a team to be reckoned with. Unfortunately, they do go to Oklahoma, and I have them as a 11-point dog in that game. And then their second toughest game I have against Texas, they get to host Texas, which I have a pick 'em. That'll be a hell of a Week 12 game.
Yeah, ending the season that way and off of a Kansas State game. So for OSU, Ralph, I agree. I just think they're so explosive on the offensive side, the defensive pickups that you mentioned, in addition to the fact that they've got 10 guys back, should be a good season for Jim Knowles and company on that side of the ball. We'll go to Texas as we await Drew's return, but we'll move on here. And here we go, Ralph. This is the other team in what I think the two of us consider a 3-team race for the conference championship of the Big 12 this year. Tom Herman, I'm going to take a little bit and just go through. Somehow we missed this team. I don't know how, and it's on me because I missed it. I laid out the schedule, but we didn't do Texas offensive and defensive coordinator changes, maybe because they don't have a head coaching change. Maybe that's why I skipped it, but we have changes on both sides of the ball here. And let's start with Mike Ursuch, the new offensive coordinator, with probably one of my favorite quotes from a coordinator of all time. At his introductory press conference, he said, "Calling plays gets me off." Yeah, you got to love a guy who's that excited about calling plays. He's never done it before. He's held a lot of positions and led a lot of explosive offenses, or been part of a lot of explosive offenses, most notably Oklahoma State. Last year, Ohio State. And the Ohio State part really fits here, Ralph, because it gave Mike Ursuch some insight into the offense that Tom Herman runs here. It's a hybrid of what Urban Meyer started years ago, the power spread. It's evolved a little bit. And so Ursuch steps into a situation where he's going to kind of tweak this deal. He didn't change any of the terminology whatsoever. He came in and learned all the previous terminology to make it easier on the kids. 3 things here that we'll see out of Texas that are going to be a little bit different. They're going to be fast tempo. And for Ursuch, his idea behind going fast is just to stop defensive coordinators and defenses from being able to recognize what they're going to call and adjust their defense. Here's a list for guys who don't know how much that goes on pre-snap. Here's a list of the things that Mike Ursuch said going up tempo eliminates for defensive coordinators. He said they want to see what you're in. They want to see you line up. They want to signal over to their safety. They want to signal to their Mike backer. They want to see where the tailback is lined up. They want to see what the guard and center split on the backside is. And they want to call all of that out and then call their defense. His idea is we're going to get up there in less than 20 seconds. We're going to eliminate all of that. We're going to know our offensive plays better than they know their defensive scheme and go from there. Subsequently, he's kind of simplified the offense a little bit to make it easier on the players here. But you can expect fast tempo out of Texas, which they hadn't been under Tom Herman. And he's ditched Tom Herman's 11 personnel, which is 1 back, 1 tight end. He's going to use every type of personnel, all formations, anything that he thinks will succeed. For Texas, and I know you'll bring up some of these numbers, Ralph, but offensively, last 3 years, they went from 29.5 points a game to 31 points a game to 35.2 points per game. Ursuch says in order to win in this league, you better score by around 45 or 46 a game. So for those of you who play totals, you might want to stem toward Texas over here. This guy's looking to go ahead and get into the mid-40s every single game. On the defensive side, it's Chris Ash, former Ohio State DC, highly regarded, went to Rutgers, tried to coach there, but it's so hard. You just can't match the talent level of the rest of the Big Ten. What he's done here is he's made one major switch. They've gone from a 3-4 to a 4-2-5. The difference between 3-man fronts and 4-man fronts, Texas feels, will be in the pass rush. Last year against Utah in their bowl game, after firing Todd Orlando, who's a 3-4 proponent, they tried out a 4-man front. Against Utah, they had 5 sacks, 21 yards for loss, and tackles for loss, and they only allowed 4.2 yards per play. Pretty good defensive effort with a 4-man front. That led one of their players, who's now graduated, to say that 3-4 never really fit our style. It didn't accentuate our talents. The team will be much better in a 4-3. He said, when I went to the camps for the NFL draft, teams couldn't figure out what type of player I was. He blames it on the system. He thinks Texas will be better in that 4-3. I'm going to turn the schedule and the other stuff over to you. But in closing here, Texas had no practices, as you just said. So the on-field stuff is going to be – it might take some time, especially on defense, Ralph, because this guy plays quarters coverage, which really, to simplify that for people listening, just think of NBA help defense. That's basically what it is, except applied to football. Help defense. It's complex. Guys need to know their assignments. So that may take some time without any spring practices, but I think these 2 hires are terrific. And with Sam Ehlinger, I mean, after leading Justin Fields to 41 TDs and 3 interceptions, Mike Ursuch probably can do some damage here. Tom Herman did not want to be involved in the offense, Ralph. It's kind of amazing because he's an offensive guy, but he felt like it took away from his duties as a head coach, and he wants to be more of a CEO type this year.
You know, there's probably no team that's disappointed as much as Texas. And, you know, you might say, well, 10 wins. They've had 18 wins the last 2 years, but they're 18-9. I tweeted this earlier today, Rob. Texas has been historic as far as recruiting goes. In the last 3 years, there's only been, looking at the 2018 recruiting class and 2019 recruiting class, Texas was number 3 and number 3. So there was only 2 teams in the top 3 both years, Georgia and Texas, not Alabama, not Clemson, not Ohio State, Texas, number 3 and number 3. So an 18-9 record does not cut it. You want to talk about a guy on a hot seat. Why did he change his OC in DC? Right. He's good friends with Brian Kelly from Notre Dame. And Brian Kelly did the same thing. Remember, he was going through a couple mediocre years. He jettisoned both his OC and DC, and he saw success happen. He talked to Herman about it, and Herman decided to do the same thing. So clearly he's on the hot seat, and he feels it. Like I said, number 3 recruiting last year, but only 5-4 in the Big 12, plus 2.4 yards per game. So that means, you are a 5-4 team. I do have a stat for Sam Ehlinger, and remember, last year he had all that Heisman hype early. People were so big on Texas, and this is the year they can knock it off. In the last 20 years, there have only been 5 other Power 5 quarterbacks to throw for 25 touchdowns and run for 25 touchdowns. All previous 5 before Ehlinger last year won the Heisman. So, that's the type of talent you have. Add in that you have 16 returning starters. That's by far the most he's had back. Add in the defense, which now has 9 starters back with that Chris Sash system. Add in a number 9 recruiting class. So they went 3-3-9 their last 3 years. You have a ton of talent on there, but then you watch and those people aren't getting drafted. They're not taking that talent they recruit and they're not turning them into NFL players. So is that Herman's fault? Are they just recruiting the wrong guys? I don't know. You talked about the defense. Perhaps it doesn't fit to the system, but to me, I have Texas as the second best team. I have Texas looking through their schedule. Let me scroll down to it. And, they go to LSU, so they got a tough non-conference game. I have them as about a touchdown underdog there. And then I have them as a 5-point dog to Oklahoma, and then a pick 'em at Oklahoma State. So they clearly have the ability to get to 11 wins. We'll see with the Oklahoma game again, but second best team in the Big 12. It's all there for Herman. I think if he doesn't get the 10 wins and a bowl win, maybe 11 wins, I could see a change. I could see a change in the offing there just because, again, this is Texas. 10 wins don't cut it down there.
Yeah, no doubt, Ralph. And you're right about these head coaches. When they start to feel heat, there's more examples beyond Brian Kelly, who will just throw caution to the wind and make these changes, and coordinators, anything to save their own hide. And then you have to see how that develops. In Brian Kelly's case, it's worked out. Notre Dame's gotten better. I think these 2 hires are really good for Texas as well. They've been known to give Oklahoma trouble in the past. So maybe they can do it again. I see the pen. Go ahead.
You talked about changing that defense in the secondary. Here's the stat, and this stat's mind-boggling. There's 130 teams in the FBS. Texas allowed 154 completions of 10 yards or more. That was last in the country. So you want to talk about needing a secondary change. Texas was that team from last year.
Yeah, the players, like I say, and one very outspoken guy, mentioned that in Orlando's system, the secondary was scrambling every play to understand where they were supposed to be. It seemed like it was we always talk about trying to put the square peg in the round hole, and maybe that's what Todd Orlando was doing. Chris Ash is going to have far superior athletes here than he had at Rutgers. And one of his big complaints at Rutgers, not complaints because he knew what he had for talent, but one of the big problems in his estimation with their coverage was the outside corners are expected to play man on deep patterns. And he said the guys he got at Rutgers just couldn't match up with the Big Ten speed. People would run right by him. They give a lot of big plays. At Texas, you get guys that can run with people. So we'll see how it goes. But I think we're both on the same page. We like Texas. I'm glad you brought up Ehlinger, too, because in my mind, when I went through Texas, I thought of him as a Heisman Trophy possibility, maybe a guy you could take a shot on there. I don't know the odds.
He was like 14 last year, and he's like 30 or 40. I think he's at 40 this year. So, clearly You have Spencer at Oklahoma, the third choice behind the two big boys, Fields and Lawrence, and then Spencer Rattler, and then a couple other guys, and Ellender's down there. So, to me, remember a couple years ago, Adrian Martinez and Ellinger got all that hype, and it was clearly a year early for Ellinger, although his numbers produced. But you still have to win games. You can't be that middle of the road team and win that Heisman, even though Ellinger put up great numbers, but his defense just let him down so much.
Yeah, no question. He's a guy who's, his style could lead to injury as well. He's not one to shy away from contact, but I think we both like Texas here. We'll move on to Gary Patterson and TCU. We talked about him a little bit off air for a different reason. Gary Patterson, in an article I read, just for listeners to know, because you and I have already talked about it, but he said that if an opposing coach on the week of a game against TCU does not disclose their coronavirus players, that his team won't play the game. He wants everything to be out in the open, listed almost like an injury report form, so that they know who should be on the field and who should not be on the field. The opposing coach view to that was that this particular coach would not release any information whatsoever, make it hard on the other side to game plan. All of a sudden at game time, you're surprised by who's on the field and who's not, using it as a strategical advantage. Aside from that, let's get to TCU, Ralph, and I'll let you go first here. That's a team that went 5-7 last year, well substandard for this squad. Point spread numbers were not good either. Before I turn it over real quick, and then I'll take it back when you're done, their last 7 games, all Big 12 games last year, were decided, or 6 of the 7 were decided by 7 or less. And yet they went 2-5 against the spread in those games. So it shows how maybe overvalued TC was last year. We'll talk about it as we go along here, whether we think they'll be overvalued or undervalued this year. Take it away.
I'm going to make one comment on Patterson. And by the way, now this is Gary Patterson's 21st season at TCU. So really becoming an elder statesman. Listen, there's no coach that's not going to have enough integrity to sit a COVID player. So why he has to get mentioned? What does it matter who the player is? If the player is not part of the team and he's sitting down, it's like anything. It's like any injury in football. I agree with you. I'm sure we will have, the Big 12 is going to step in and say these are the rules, and Patterson's going to have to follow those rules, or they're going to forfeit, and and that's not going to happen. You're not going to forfeit football games because of that. But you mentioned those. TCU was -5 close wins. What does that mean? It means you take the close wins, you take the close losses, the difference. So -5 is an incredible number. That's the highest that's been in college football in the last couple years. You look at their stats. They were 3-6 in Big Ten play. And again, I'm a big proponent of conference yards per game because it tells you exactly how competitive they were. Everyone played 9 games. Well, TCU was 3-6 and they were plus 38 yards per game. Let's compare that to a team we talked with last week, Kansas State. Kansas State was 5-4, and they were -51 yards per game. So TCU, 2 fewer wins, but almost 90 yards per game better than Kansas State. Now, while the close games, losing, being -5 net close games, has me leaning that TCU is going to be an up year. What doesn't is having 5 NFL players drafted. You went through your season, you lost 7 games, and you had 2 number 1s, a number 2, a number 3, and a number 7 NFL draft pick. So, you had more players than any other team in the Big 12, including Oklahoma. So that's an issue for me. You're losing that type of talent for a team like TCU. They are not Ohio State. They are not Bama. They are not Clemson. They don't reload like that. Their recruiting class last year was number 31. Their recruiting class this year is 28. But, Boise and TCU, when they were in the Mountain West, they were both those teams that took 3-star athletes, turned them into 4 or 5 stars. And that's exactly what Patterson did again. He never can recruit with the biggest of boys, but he finds that next closest set of people, and he makes them better with their work ethic. So, I look at him. You're counting on Max Dugan, now a sophomore. Obviously, playing as a freshman in the Big 12 is not easy. A 15-10 ratio. I'm not convinced. Down there, though, they all love Jerry Kill. Jerry Kill got brought in, the old head coach of Northern Illinois and Minnesota, and he got brought in as an assistant, an offensive specialist assistant. They're basically calling him the head coach of the offense, although they have an OC as well. But, the road games are there. The stats are there. But with what they lost in the NFL, I have them as I have them all the way down as the number 6 or 7 team in the conference. So clearly, I am not as high as TCU as they are down south.
Yeah, it's quite the situation here, Ralph. And I'm going to jump on a couple of things that you said and add to them as well. Namely, let's start with Max Dugan. Obviously, second year in the system, that is a positive. He went through some growing pains last year, wasn't the most accurate quarterback. This year, they returned one offensive lineman by numbers, one offensive lineman. Okay, their center comes back, 12 starts last year. When you're listing returning starters, that's basically it. However, they have a backup offensive guard who's going to step in now and play one of the guard positions, who's had 8 starts in the last 2 years, 4 each year. 4 obviously doesn't qualify you for starting in any season, but 8 starts are still 8 starts in the Big 12. There's some experience there. They got a transfer, 6'7", 320-pound left tackle from Colorado State, where it seemed as if the commitment was going to Purdue, wound up last minute changing to TCU. Grad transfer, TJ Stormont, 12 starts at left tackle for Colorado State last year. Mountain West, not exactly what the Big 12 is, but if he's got any decent left tackle ability in him, that's a plus for TCU. They don't have to go fishing for a young guy or anything else to play that position. They've got one guy coming back, Wes Harris, a guy who had 5 starts in 2018, was starting last year and gets injured after 2 games. So you and I talk a lot about these returning starter numbers sometimes being a bit phony. Maybe TCU has, in my estimation, just adding all this up, 2.5 starters across the offensive line coming back. Still, they're without a right tackle. And Max Dugan, in my estimation, is going to need offensive line protection here. That's going to be a big issue for TCU this year because everything I just said, trying to prop their experience up a little bit, doesn't show me any depth. Somebody gets hurt, where are we going on the bench? There's a lot of freshmen that Gary Patterson mentioned in an article, but freshmen are still freshmen. It's a team that wants to lean on its running game because they have a stable full of running backs. But again, you have to be able to run block. Limited spring practice obviously hurts all these things. The wide receiving core, Rager, first rounder off to Philadelphia. I don't know that TCU is as loaded as they have been in recent years at the wide receiver position. So they've got issues, Ralph. There's no question about it. While the returning quarterback seems nice, and bringing back Doug Meacham to coach inside receivers and tight ends is nice. Remember, Meacham was the co-coordinator with Sonny Cumbie a couple years back. He went on to Kansas to join David Beatty. They got into a riff, and all of a sudden, Meacham had no job, and now he's back at TCU. So offensively, I see trouble. And you talked about the draft picks. Those draft picks, those high draft picks, the NFL hurt the defensive side most of all. They hurt the defensive line and they hurt the cornerback situation. And boy, if there's a spot you don't want to be weak in the Big 12, it's at your corners, and then compound it with your defensive line pass rush. It's a nightmare. I don't know if they can replace what they lost. You said their recruiting class 31st in the nation, but they just don't bring them in 5-star the way Ohio State and other teams do. Yeah, Gary Patterson is more in the mold of what you mentioned, like what Gary Pinkel used to be at Missouri. Take these 3-stars and develop them into really good players.
Bill Snyder as well did it.
JUCO route there for him, sure.
I look at TCU and they're going to have, they've got some challenges early. At Cal, I basically have a pick 'em. So you have a young quarterback going against a good defense. even at SMU, I only have them as a 5 or 6 point favorite. So, you're talking about a stretch where you potentially you could make or break your season in the non-conference schedule. So you have a young quarterback, you have a team that disappointed last year. If by chance you lose to Cal and lose to SMU, I might be looking to fade them, because then they have Oklahoma State, then they go to West Virginia. But it's a situation where the better teams in the conference, you have Oklahoma State as your first conference game. Well, that's actually an edge to the team that has much more experience, Oklahoma State. Then you have to go to Baylor, a team that's ranked where you are. You have to go to Texas, the team ahead of you. So, I look at them, and I think they're going to be fortunate to get to 7 wins this year.
Yeah, as we close here, I'll just list the issues I have with them: offensive line, wide receiver, pass rush, and cornerback. And those are significant. I mean, I often talk about having a lot of returning offensive linemen and defensive linemen as a buy sign. This team doesn't have either. That's pretty much a sell sign for me on TCU. They do get 5 home games rather than 4. So in that respect, conference play, they're helped out a little bit, but I just don't know, Ralph. I don't think that, I don't want to sell Gary Patterson short. Great head coach. But on the other hand, I just don't know that with the way this, conference is moving up, in my estimation, this season. They look like they have a few more talented teams. I don't know that they'll be able to find their way to 7 wins. Texas Tech. All right, I'll confess here. I mean, I'm just a fan of Matt Wells. I'm a fan of David Yost as the offensive coordinator, and I want badly for Texas Tech to be good. Probably skews my opinion in some sorts. They're probably a year away, though, Ralph, and I'll lead with this, and then I'll get it to you. Texas Tech, here's a bad enough statistic. They allowed less than 30 points one time in Big 12 play last year. 8 times they allowed better than 30 points against Big 12 opponents. That's bad enough. But they did not allow less than 509 total yards to any Big 12 opponent last season. That includes Kansas State. That includes Kansas, teams you don't necessarily correlate with 509 total yards in a game. So defense is a sheer issue here. They have 8 returning starters, and it's the second year of a system. We all know that teams make progress in the second year. But, boy, Keith Patterson's had an up-and-down career, Ralph, when you go through his journeys through football. Some really good years, some really horrible years. We'll see if he can straighten it out a little bit. Matt Wells seems to have faith in him. I do love Yost, and I do love the fact that Alan Bowman's back at quarterback this year. Jet Duffy filled in and did a nice job, subsequently transferred out. But with Alan Bowman back, that offense should be even more explosive this year under Yost. So they'll get their share of points, but I don't know if they can stop anybody. You look at that schedule, non-conference is not horrible. At Texas El Paso, home to Alabama State, FCS team, and then home against Arizona, which yesterday I think I read they delayed the return of their players to campus. Not so sure that with the spike in coronavirus in Arizona that they want them back right away. 5 home games in conference, 4 away. I think we can almost say this is typical Texas Tech. 48-38 type games, look toward overs. Until they get something done with this defense, I can't really expect them to be as good as I would like them to be, because I want Wells and Yost to succeed here. The home stuff in the conference is West Virginia, Baylor, and Texas. They get all 3 of those in a row, so they're home for a real long time, and the close to the season brings them on the road 3 out of 5 games. We'll see if they gel or if they fade, Ralph, but it's not a team necessarily known for depth, and as the season goes on, maybe they wilt once again. Year 3, I think, will be better for this team, but I can't project them to doing much as far as outright wins are concerned. But point spread, being a little more competitive, I don't think it can be worse than allowing 509 total yards or more in every single conference game. And the offense, I think, will be better under Bowman. So maybe individual games, I could like Texas Tech side or total. But as far as season over-under wins, I can't play them over, that's for sure. Robbie,
I will correct you on one. They did hold Kansas State to 372. It was 509 for the rest of the card, but they actually had a 512 to 372 yard edge against Kansas State, but lost that game 30-27. I know we have to be realists when we're handicappers. And so many times you go through teams and you say, oh, they're improved. Well, yes, you have a second year head coach, but everyone else besides Arnada is also second year or longer. Yes, you have a second year quarterback, but you happen to be in the best conference of quarterbacks there is. So, and I know Alan Bowman threw for 2,600 yards a couple of years ago, had a 17-7 ratio. And then, oh my God, all you heard about was the first 3 games. He threw for 1,000 yards. They put up 691 against Montana, 424 against UTEP, and 411 against Arizona. People thought he was going to be the Heisman winner. I mean, that's what a start he had. But I'm going to say this. He put up 500 yards against Montana State. He put up 500 yards against UTEP at home. And they went to Arizona. They put up 411 yards, but they couldn't score. They only scored 14 points. He got hurt in that game, and then Duffy did finish. Now, one thing you have to remember is there's quarterback injuries, and then there's quarterback injuries. Bowman, clearly was the starter. Duffy was actually the number 3 quarterback. They had a freshman, Maverick McIver, I believe is his name, and he was supposed to be the number 2, and he got hurt last year. So, Duffy, who filled in, was actually the number 3 quarterback. So you have to put that in perspective moving forward. In fact, McIver now is the number 2 quarterback. Duffy actually transferred out because they told him, listen, you're going to be the number 3 quarterback, and he wanted to transfer. So you look at TCU and Texas Tech, and you say, wow, they did that with a number 3 quarterback after their starter got hurt the first 9 games. So that puts it a little more in perspective. But, they were minus 76 yards per game in conference play. Their wins against Oklahoma State, how did you do that? Well, you were plus 5 turnovers. That's not a legitimate win. When you're plus 5 turnovers, you are going to win a college football game. And then their only other conference win was at West Virginia. They actually got outgained to West Virginia by almost 60 yards, ended up winning that sort of plus 4 turnovers. So in their 2 wins, you're plus 9 turnovers. That doesn't happen, in games where you're going to win. So I think, I have them, Kansas and West Virginia, no question, as my bottom 3. I don't see a lot of movement this year. They return 14 starters. Again, that number is good, but it's behind Oklahoma. It's behind Oklahoma State. It's behind Texas. It's just ahead of Iowa State. It's just ahead of West Virginia. So to me, 5, they're going to be a double-digit dog 5 times. They're going to be a big favorite once. They're going to be a small favorite. They'll be a double-digit favorite 3 times, a single-digit favorite twice, a pick'em game once, and they're going to be a double-digit dog 5 times. I think 6-6, and if they get to a bowl, Matt Wells did a great job this year.
Yeah, no doubt. And, the same problem just seems to go on for Texas Tech. And obviously there's, they're shy when it comes to recruiting, but their defense hasn't been good since Mike Leach. They're just never good. They can't get that side of the ball fixed. Therefore, they become virtually the same team every single year. David Yost, the guy who coached Jordan Love at Utah State and put him in the NFL, maybe you can do the same for Bowman. Bowman and Jet Duffy both had experience prior to last year. They both played in some sporadically the season before. So
Bowman played quite a bit. I think he had a 7-17 ratio 2 years ago. So yeah, he had significant time, no question. But so much was made of the start he had. But I look at the competition, and I am just not convinced that. Again, he's going to have to show me that he can go on the road and do something. And again, his one road game, they did have 400 yards at Arizona, but again, you scored 14 points. So yes, he's another year mature. Now he's in the system. He knows the system well. But, when you're picking your teams to move up and down, we talked about Kansas last week, but you're talking about you're competing with West Virginia and Kansas may have the best running back and the second best running back and the best receiver in the Big 12. I mean, that shows you how the bottoms have come up. And I just think Texas Tech is going to slide down and may finish. I'll make a call. They may finish last in the Big 12. That wouldn't surprise me.
No, entirely possible. And again, when we talk about these things to everybody listening, season outright wins and game by game ATS spread covers are totally different things. Right now, the majority of the talk we have going on is 4 season total wins over and under. Texas Tech doesn't qualify as a team that you want to rush out and play over on. Like you said, Ralph, Kansas, a team where it seems like they have, it changed gears here a little bit, almost like what Jim Harbaugh had to do at Michigan when he brought Josh Gaddis in. The first 3 or 4 games looked like Jim Harbaugh was putting the brakes on because he's so conservative offensively, and Michigan just didn't look like a Josh Gaddis run offense. And the same happened to Les Miles at Kansas. I mean, the first few games with Koenig, and they ran the ball a lot. Then they bring in Dearman, throw caution to the wind. I think Les Miles saw the light, and Kansas may be just as explosive as some of the bottom teams in the Big 12 this season. West Virginia closes it out for us here. And real quick, let's get some administrative work out of the way here with an offensive coordinator change. Jared Parker brought in, not to change the system. Neil Brown's air raid is going to stay in place. Brought in basically because Neil Brown is real good friends with this guy. They played together under Hal Mumme. Interesting.
At Kentucky?
There. At Kentucky.
Yeah.
So the air raid is bred in both of them. Jared Parker comes over from Penn State. Neil Brown very biasedly calls him the best wide receivers coach in the country, but he's not here to coach or to pump up the pass game. He's here to pump up the run game. Real quick number here, Ralph. 7 straight games last year to close the season where West Virginia scored 24 or less. You score 24 or less, you're not winning in the Big 12. So that's why Parker's here. They have to fix the running game. That running game averaged 2.6 yards per carry last year. Again, 24 points as your season high in Big 12 play. And then in the last 7 games, it was your high. And then having 2.6 yards per carry, just not going to cut it. So we'll see. Parker said the running game won't be traditional. It's going to be fit inside the air raid system. So we've seen a lot of these running games that are successful with splits and running off of the passing game. So they could very well turn things around here. But it's got to start with the offensive line. And the offensive line situation in West Virginia is nowhere near as dire as it is in TCU, which is why I think, in my estimation, West Virginia probably makes a bigger climb this year than does TCU. If they can get the offensive line to open up some holes here and protect the quarterback a little bit, remember the last 3 games of the year, Jarrett Dagey came in and really sparked this team. They had Austin Kendall quarterbacking the first 9. Both of those guys are back. So if one gets hurt, there's plenty of experience in Neil Brown's offense here to fill the void. Neil Brown, another one of these coaches, talked about Tom Herman. Didn't want the responsibility of running an offense anymore. Neil Brown said that he felt like, even though he had a coordinator last year, that entire offensive staff waited on him during the week to make decisions. So he wanted to get rid of that and become more again of a CEO presence overseeing the entire operation. Therefore, everything's turned over to Parker. Play calling, it'll be his first time. We'll see how he does. But he made this running game and the improvement of this running game a collective effort. Smart move. You come in, you get all your coaches together who have been there. Let's throw some ideas out on the table. How can we change some blocking schemes? How can we get the run game going? I think they probably will. I mean, you can't be worse than 2.6, so they'll be better running the football, which may lead to better offensive output from this team. Defensively, Vic Koenig, right, the defensive coordinator, suspended. Again, we live in a time right now where you really have to be careful what you've said in the past, even not what you say in the present, but what you've said in the past, because Vic Koenig was called to the carpet by a player. A lot of allegations there. Some he's been defended on, some he hasn't. His suspension is indefinite, Ralph. And I look through their defensive staff, and the only guy I see capable of being the interim defensive coordinator for this season would be Jeff Coons, who currently is their inside linebackers coach and was a defensive coordinator, a co-DC at Cincinnati for 1 year. So they're going to be
let me ask you this, Rob.
Yeah.
It's still June. You haven't had spring practices. Is there someone out there? I mean, if you're a head coach, might you go outside and bring someone in and not make them an interim and just say, listen, or call them an interim, but not hire from within and try to find someone that, if you believe in your schemes, believes in that same type of schemes and can come in and help them. You have enough time. Don't you have enough time to do it still?
You do. I would say that you do. I mean, the most recent change we saw was when, we had the change at Michigan State right in February with Mel Tucker right before recruiting happened. Or you promote from within, Ralph. That's the other way to go, is just promote from within. You've got a guy who knows your personnel, who knows your system, and you trust that maybe he can call defensive plays. Honestly, from what I read, it didn't seem like Neil Brown was aggressively seeking anybody yet, but the story is still fresh.
Yeah.
And it's still new. We don't have any determination on what the status of Koning's going to be, but we'll see where that leads as we go through July and August. For Parker, like I say, a guy to fix the offense. Like the quarterback play here, Ralph, I think the offensive line is going to be greatly improved for this team. And defensively, you're in a system for the second season. I mean, the players do know it, whether Koning's there or not. The players do know it. And they were not bad defensively, to be honest with you, in their first season. I mean, they played a lot of very untypical West Virginia games from recent memory, where we think of the high-flying offenses of Dana Holgerson, and here we got defensive struggles. Game was slowed down. Now, I'll make a quick point here. For those who want to go back just a little bit, Neil Brown, yes, he's an air raid coach, but you go back to a couple of those seasons at Troy where, again, they leaned on running game. They didn't score a lot of points. They were not very explosive, and yet they won games. So Neil Brown kind of knows how to do it both ways. He prefers to be explosive. When they had Brandon Silvers at Troy that final year that Brown was there, that's what got him this job. They really exploded for points. That's what they're looking for here, and maybe Jared Parker can provide it. The non-conference schedule sees them playing Florida State to start the season at a neutral site, Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. I don't know if West Virginia can beat Florida State, but Florida State's a work in progress as well. More talented, but a work in progress. Eastern Kentucky and Maryland at home should both be wins, and then they head into the conference season where they get 5 home, 4 away. They get Oklahoma at home. They go on the road to play Texas, and they go on the road to play Oklahoma State. So probably not outright wins in those last 2. But I think a team that can play close games and get some point spread covers here, and maybe if their over-under totals, Ralph, are kind of presented to us in the form of what last year produced, maybe we can get away with some value toward the over early on.
Yeah, you talked about their defense, Rob. 399 yards per game, not bad in the Big 12. 3.8 yards per carry on defense, 62% completion. So, you look at their defense, and I look at what their defense did compared to the averages of those teams, and they were the 50th best. So, you've got the Stills brothers, who could be Darius, maybe the best defensive player in the Big 12. So you got big tackles in the middle there that can cause havoc. It is too bad they lost Sills. Remember, this was a second-team Big 12 offensive lineman who only started 2 games last year. So you lose your best offensive lineman, that's going to throw your season into a funk. And then those that don't know and didn't follow, Austin Kendall started the first 9 games. When they played Texas Tech, they were down in the second half, and they brought in Jarrett Dagey. He's a Bowling Green transfer. Mm-hmm. I pulled up this stat. Last season, there were 27 occurrences where a team pulled an upset as a dog of 11 or more. So only 27 times in Division I football did an 11-point dog win. Dagey did it twice in 3 starts. Knocked off Kansas State as a double-digit dog, knocked off TCU as a double-digit dog. So certainly high-flying momentum moving forward. But, I look at them. And another thing to remember, 5 wins was an incredible job. They only had 9 returning starters last year. This year they have 13. They have, again, both quarterback backs, as you mentioned. You look at their season in conference play, 3-6, minus 85 yards per game. So that's not good. That was second worst behind Kansas, 5 yards worse than Texas Tech. Florida State game, I have them as over a touchdown dog. I have them as a dog in 7 games, a double-digit favorite in 2 and a favorite in 1. So while they may improve, while their conference yards per game will be better, they're not going to pull 3 out. They pulled 3 upsets last year as a dog of 7 or more. I don't think they get to pull those upsets this year. I think teams are more prepared. And, West Virginia always has such a unique travel schedule because, they're out in the Midwest there, and they have to make those long trips to hot and humid areas. Last year at home, they averaged 379 yards per game. On the road, they only averaged 265 yards. So 114 yards per game less away from home than they did.
Yeah, the offense was simply abysmal, Ralph, last season by West Virginia standards. And I was going to make the point that you just made, maybe a little bit in reverse, but being a mid-rung team in the Big 12, they are one of those that really can feed off of their home field advantage. Morgantown, a real difficult place to play, especially Morgantown at night. If they had any night games scheduled this year, I did not see. But in general, Morgantown, a tough place to play. And with no fans in the stands or limited amount of fans in the stands, you wonder how much of that home field advantage is taken away for West Virginia, turning them more into a mediocre team than a slightly above average one. I think there's a bunch of teams, as we said to start with, Ralph. There's the top of this conference that can really be listed as elite, 3 top 15 clubs potentially. And then there's the rest where it's a crapshoot and you throw these 7 teams in a blender and figure out where they're going to land. So it'd be an interesting conference this season for sure. Anything you want to add before we close it out here?
Yeah, for those that, didn't watch the first half, I'm very high on Iowa State as well. So, to me, they're a team. So, when you're playing those season win totals, this is a conference because of the quarterbacks, because of the returning starters. You just have to remember everyone can't improve. So when you get to these teams and you think they're improved and they're improved and they're improved, well, when you get down to it and Baylor's playing TCU, you got to write a W and an L somewhere. And, when West Virginia travels to Texas Tech, hell, even that West Virginia-Kansas game this year is going to be something. So I do agree. Top 4, I consider it this. I consider it Oklahoma, then I consider it Oklahoma State, Texas, and Iowa State, then the middle group, and then the bottom group, West Virginia, Texas Tech, and Kansas.
Yeah, don't be surprised by anything out of that bottom group. That's what we're here to try and seek out. I will say, as Ralph pointed out, in the first half of this Big 12 preview that we've done, I think both of us agreed that if you're betting game by game, you might want to take a look at Baylor over the total this season with only 2 defensive starters back and an offense that features 9 guys and Charlie Brewer. Maybe some problems for Baylor going through an entire coaching staff change. The defensive side seems to me to be the more difficult side to rectify than the offensive side, especially after the terrific defensive season they had this season. So next week we'll head on to the Pac-12, Ralph. We'll do Pac-12 North. Unfortunately, we lost Drew here, so I don't know how to even end this show because Drew had the controls to start with. But I will say, in loss of Drew, make sure to wash your hands and make sure to join us next week for the Pac-12 North preview. We'll sign off here, Ralph, but I don't know how, to tell you the truth.
Well, Drew had texted me and said, just keep going. He was having a camera issue. So we will chat for the last minute and we will, sure. we will move on. So, when you look at that Big 12, a couple of those teams that we talked about struggling on the bottom last year, Texas Tech was the number 62 recruiting. Kansas State was 63 and Kansas was 70. That's pretty pathetic to have 3 conference teams higher than 60. This year, everyone is 57 or lower. Kansas is the worst team. So the players found the Big 12. They're getting the respect they earned. It's not just Oklahoma and everyone else. And the teams are finally starting to share some of the wealth. So a big difference when you're Kansas and you're, a 71 year down to 57, and West Virginia, 48 last year, second year of Neil Brown, 37. So he's kept some of that local talent at home.
Yeah, and I think Les Miles is a big enough draw at Kansas, Ralph, but Les Miles with a dynamic offense would really attract top flight offensive kids there. So maybe they can continue to improve. Obviously, the other two guys you mentioned in their second year, Matt Wells down at Lubbock, Texas, and Neil Brown in West Virginia, both have really good recruiting staffs. So we'll see if everybody can keep improving there and make it tougher on the top run team.
Drew texted me. He's logging in and he will sign out our streams. So guys, we appreciate you. Pac-12 next week. Can't wait, Robbie.
Wash your hands. Pens up, everybody. Pens
Thanks.
up. We'll see you next week.